I showed you this same image earlier in T.
This is the big in the thing we drew out. It was the T killer cells with the reverting. That's the enzyme.
It's wrong, don't. She's right, you can thank her if she's wrong.
I don't want that girl to fix it.
Your decision
Converse
is
with it.
going on.
Normally we converse.
I know.
I was like, what am I gonna do? We gotta do it.
I think that's right. I think it is. Alrighty? Then ready to move on? Donna might have to change it tonight. Which is fine, hospital still can.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Alright, so what we looked at before with the T killer cells was cell-mediated immunity, where as you saw in the quiz, the T killer cell and the cell is attacking with perforating enzymes, comes right up and has the interaction between the CD8 T cell receptor and the MHC class 1. However, with antibody-mediated immunity, the B lymphocyte making the antibodies can be the distance from your jaw to your big toe, because the antibodies travel through the bloodstream, and it doesn't have to be nearby at all. It needs to be close to the antigen, right next to the antigen to get activated, but once the antibodies are being made, that requirement isn't there. So we still need the T helper cell, and then the T helper cells release the same interleukin-1 to activate the T killer cells. I'm sorry, that was used to activate the T killer cells, the same interleukin-1 will activate B lymphocytes. Okay? So here's the same kind of overall view of how we have T helper cell. So the macrophage ingesting, or the dendritic cell ingesting the antigen and putting it out there with the MHC class 2 molecule, and the T cell helper cell receiving the interleukin-1 from the macrophage. So our T helper cell is already activated. So now we're going to have the plasma cell. Or not, we're going to make the plasma cell. Remember, a B lymphocyte is also an antigen-presenting cell, okay? Which means it has MHC1 or MHC2. That was a trick question. It has both. Because it's a nucleated cell, so it's going to have MHC class 1. But because it's an antigen-presenting cell, we're going to look at the MHC class 2 component, all right? So here is our B lymphocyte. Cell takes up less room than the word lymphocyte, so I'll put in lymphocyte. And it's going to come in contact with a antigen, all right? Or we'll use the same viral antigen. So remember, B cells are going to have their own receptors. But the B cell receptor is an antibody, as we'll see later. So it's a different structural molecule than the T cell receptor. And if an antigen binds to that, so it's going to recognize that antigen, all right, which is going to bind to it, because it's specific to it. And then that will be internalized through endocytosis, like receptor-mediated endocytosis. So this is a form of receptor-mediated endocytosis. And my eraser here. So a bunch of those B cell receptors, I'm just gonna draw one, are gonna be internalized into the cell. And be broken down by lysosomes. So now we have this membranous vesicle with the antibody and the viral protein. And that's going to fuse with the lysosome, okay? And that's going to create, should have drawn my B cell bigger. That's going to create a cell that has the viral proteins broken down, just like we did with the macrophage, okay? And then that's going to fuse with a membrane from the endoplasmic reticulum that has the MHC class II molecule. So these two fuse together. And now, whoops, wrong color. Now the viral antigen can bind to the MHC class II molecule and be inserted onto the surface. Starting to look familiar? So there's our viral, and I just drew it bigger because I wasn't like crawling on myself here. So there's a part of the viral protein that was broken down by the lysosome, inserted onto the surface of the B cell via an MHC class II, just like we did with the macrophage, okay? But this is our B cell. Now, comes along an activated T helper cell. It got activated in the same way, all right? So all we've done here is prepare our B cell for activation. It's not yet ready to make antibodies. So it needs the chemicals from the T helper cell. So here's our T helper cell. And it has T cell receptors. And only if the T cell receptors match the same antigen that turned on, that bound to the plasma cell, that bound to the B lymphocyte, will it bind. So this is our specific process here. Those two have to match, okay? So what's the stabilizing protein utilized by the T helper cell? CD4. So CD4 comes along, binds to that. Now, this is already active, okay? So it doesn't have to get any interleukin-1 from the plasma, from the B cell. It could, but it's already active. So it's going to send out interleukin-2, the same chemical molecule it used to activate the T killer cell. So it's going to send interleukin-2 and that's going to activate the B cell. T helper cell separates, goes off and activates another B cell that happens to have the same antigen, okay? And so now our B cell is going to do one of two things. Well, it will divide, all right? So it will divide, and it will divide, and it will divide, and it will divide, and it will form these memory B cells. But one of those won't wait for that, or several of them won't wait. Several of these will stay as memory cells, and others will become plasma cells. Not just one, but a bunch. And they'll develop that extra cytoplasm that will contain the Golgi and the ribosomal ER. And this becomes a factory for making antibodies, because antibodies leave the cell. Remember, if it has a membrane-bound destination, It doesn't use the free ribosomes, it uses ribosomes that attach to the ribosomal ER. So now this cell starts releasing antibodies, whose variable region match that specific epitope that was on that antigen matched by the T helper cell. Okay? So there's our B cell activation. So that's summarized here. Okay? So in review, before we move on to talk about antibodies, T killer cells are associated with MHC1, and that they stabilize the interaction with CD8 molecules. And we're talking about endogenous peptides on the MHC1, which is why T killer cells attack virus-infected cells, tumor cells, and transplant cells, because those cells have non-self antigens on their MHC1. Okay. B cells and T helper cells are associated, not B cells, but T helper cells are associated with the MHC class 2 and are stabilized by CD4. And MHC class 2, whether it's the macrophage or the B cell or the dendritic cell, have exogenous. So they have to be broken down by lysosomes rather than be synthesized by the cell. Another view of the same thing that this image showed. Okay. All right. So now let's take a closer look for a few moments at antibodies. We just talked about antibodies as antibodies in general, the fragment, the variable fragment, and the constant fragment. So here's a fancier diagram. So these changes in here are random depending on the genetic modification of the cell. When the B cells or the T cells divide, and for this case it would be the B cell. But each B cell is going to make the same antibodies. Okay, so it's going to have the same variable region and the same constant region. All the antibodies made by the original clone cell. And that's determined by the antibody that's on its surface that's forming the B cell receptor. Whatever this recognizes is whatever its antibodies are going to recognize. We have these 5 classes. IG stands for immunoglobulin. Remember we had different globulins, different proteins in our blood, and immunoglobulin is one of those types. And so we have immunoglobulin G, and we have immunoglobulin D and M and A and E. They all have some variation of this Y form. So IgA, IgG is the most common. This is what we talk about with this response right here. Okay, so typically the response of the B, well, it's all going to be B cells, but typically when we talk about getting a vaccination and forming antibodies, or getting the disease and getting the flu and getting antibodies, those primary and secondary immune responses are primary IgG. And this is how a newborn has immunity, is the mother's immunoglobulin Gs will cross the placenta and be in the baby's blood for a little over 3 months after it's born. Okay. Now, IgD, is what we call the receptor. So that, remember I said this is an antibody, and it's antibody and immunoglobulin D primarily, although it can be M. Okay, usually it's immunoglobulin D. IgM has 5 antibodies. It can activate complement. It's also the one that we have in transfusion reactions. So you can see how many red blood cells are going to be agglutinated if we have 10 binding sites, all right, on these antibodies here. And then the IgA is the one that we have in secretion. So saliva, tears, our second chemical line under the first line of defense, the chemical portion. And this is what is in breast milk. Okay, so the baby's going to lose its antibodies it was born with that cross the placenta, Once the mother is able to breastfeed, she can maintain, extend that protection to her infant via breastfeeding. And then finally, remember all the FCs we talked about with the mast cells and the basophils? Those were IgEs. Okay. So antibodies themselves don't do any physical destruction. Our T lymphocytes, with the release of perforin and granzyme, actually poke holes and physically themselves chemically destroy the cell they were interacting with. Antibodies don't physically destroy anything. They make it more likely for some other process to cause the cell or the toxin to be negated. So neutralization is when we're not talking about a cell, but we're talking about molecules released by bacteria or other components, bee toxin, various snake venom toxins, okay? And they can be bound to and either precipitated out of solution, or by binding to them, they don't fit into their receptor. So they're not going to be internalized into another cell. So essentially neutralization of their poison, okay, by not allowing them to be effective. Then we have oxidization. So oxidization can occur by the complement protein, or we can oxidize with the antibody. And this can either activate the complement, but it also makes the bacteria more likely to be ingested, just like putting complement on there did. Okay? And then of course, if we use the IgM for our blood transfusions, it's going to agglutinate it, and that's going to make it easier for the membrane to be broken apart as it passes into the smaller capillaries. Okay, so the antibodies themselves aren't poking holes, they're not adding chemicals to the cell, but they're making it less likely for the toxin to be harmful or more likely for another cell to break it apart. That was a preview. All right, so here's what we mean by a primary immune response and a secondary immune response. So the process that I showed you over here, this is the primary immune response. So the activation of a B cell to a plasma cell is our primary immune response. And we're talking about B cells here, okay? For that first response to occur, the first exposure of the body to that antigen, it takes about 2 weeks for the activity to be complete, but about 10 days for the highest number of antibodies to be formed. By that time, if we're talking about a flu virus or some other viral caused disease, you're going to be sick, okay? It takes most of our viral diseases about 3 to 5 days, sometimes even just 1 day. So my sister wanted me to come out and see her a few years ago. Her birthday was on a Thursday. She called me on a Monday and said, come out and see me for my birthday. I'll buy your ticket. She bought me a first class ticket. And I was like, it's expensive enough to buy a ticket 4 days before you fly, much less first class. She said, well, that was the whole thing. It was so expensive to buy a regular ticket 4 days that I just went ahead and bought the first class ticket. Well, that was nice of you, especially when you're traveling 5 hours. And so, but on the way back, I sat next to a guy that was sick. I flew back 4 days later, I was sick. Missed my family vacation. So if it takes this long to get our high level of antibodies, you're already sick, okay? But remember I talked about the memory cells? That was not a pun, but anyway. So the second time we get an exposure, within just 1 to 2 days, you start making antibodies. And notice how many more antibodies you make that second time around? Because you've already cloned lots of memory cells that only take a few hours to start making antibodies. And they divide, and those make more antibodies. Plus, not only does it take a shorter time, and we get more antibodies, it lasts for a longer period of time. Okay, so the secondary immune response is what keeps you from getting sick. The primary is just setting up the whole process, but you're probably going to get sick from that. Now, the reason most people don't get sick from flu shots is because it's a weakened virus. It's not a full-blown virus, all right? I totally believe in vaccinations, but I must admit I haven't gotten a flu shot in 10 years. It's anecdotal. Like I said, I believe in vaccinations. And we get flu shots right here at the health center. And so I hadn't gotten one for a few years. I decided to get the flu shot. My son was traveling on, he was in college and on the basketball team. And so I said, honey, you need to get a flu shot. He and I were the only ones to get the flu. And for both of us, it turned into double pneumonia. I had fluid in both my lungs, and so just as a matter of, like I said, I have no reason for not doing it, it's just anecdotal. It's not that I don't believe in it, it's just, okay, we're gonna try it a while without doing it. So it's not supposed to make you sick, and I can't say that it did, it just might match up that year with a particular flu virus that was out there. I don't know, it wasn't the vaccine that made me sick. All right, so our last thing to cover is 4 different types of immunity from B cells. We're not talking about T cells, all right? Because T cells don't provide immunity. Why not? Because they are directly attacking the cell. So if you get a heart transplanted and your T cell rejects it, the next time you get another heart transplanted, it's going to reject it again, okay? So in that sense, I suppose it's always there, but it's not going to provide, that doesn't provide immunity against illness like antibodies do. So we have 2 sets of terms. Down the bottom, you see natural and acquired. That is how you get the antigen or how you get the antibody, it doesn't matter, okay? If it's a natural process, getting the disease, or breastfeeding your baby, or crossing the placenta is a natural process. Acquired typically requires an injection, although I got my polio vaccine by, sucking on a sugar cube. Smallpox, my skin got scratched, but it's an unnatural mechanism. It's a medically devised means of exposing you to the antigen or providing you the antibodies. The difference between natural and acquired is your exposure. The difference between active and passive is whether you're making the antibodies or not. So with active, you have memory cells. You make your antibodies and you're capable of making more anytime you're exposed to that antigen, okay? Passive, you are given the antibodies already made by another human being or by another animal. You have no memory cells. Once those antibodies are broken down in your body, they're no longer there, okay? And that immunity is no longer present. So active, you actively make it, you keep the memory cells. Passive, those are provided to you. And it can be either a natural, as is the breast milk, okay? Or it can be acquired. So let's take a look at some examples. So passive, natural, or natural passive. The baby is not making its own antibodies in either situation. It's getting them from the mother across the placenta, or it's getting it from the mother in the breast milk. Okay? But it's a natural means of getting it. It's passive because, again, the child is not making the antibodies. If it doesn't have its own exposure, then it's not going to have the antibodies after a few months. Okay? Passive acquired. So the RhoGAM shot, what was in the RhoGAM shot? Antigen or antibodies? Anybody remember? That was the erythroblastosis fetalis. Is the RhoGAM shot being given to the baby or to the mom? To the mom. And it's actually to prevent her primary immune response. So the antibodies given to the mother are not to provide her immunity so much as it is to destroy the baby's fetal cells so she doesn't have a primary immune response. So the purpose of the RhoGAM is to prevent the mother from having that primary immune response by agglutinating the baby's red blood cells before she has a chance to run her primary immune response.
So that's like the lesser of the 2 evils.
Otherwise, she'd have her primary, and then anytime she had another baby, the secondary immune response would respond just like that. Okay? Anti-snake venom serum. If you get bitten by a particularly poisonous snake, now some of them are not so bad, but others are particularly bad, you don't have time to go through 10 days of primary immune response with a low level of antibodies. Okay? So this provides antibodies usually grown in a horse serum because the clotting proteins have been removed, and they can destroy the toxins of the snake venom before they have enough damage to kill you, provided you get them on time. I don't remember this gentleman in particular, but he was a professor at a college, I went there only my junior year, and they had rattlesnakes. This was back east in Maryland. They had rattlesnakes that they kept in terrariums at the college, and he was the snake handler. He'd go in there, feed them and stuff. And our college was on the Sheridan campus with the hospital. Really good for the nursing students. And he would get a snake bite and just walk across like literally 150 feet to the ER and get a anti-snake venom serum. But it happened so often that he developed a hypersensitivity or allergy to other proteins from the horse that was in the plant, that was in the serum. Not for the antibodies, but just other proteins that were in there. So he had to stop working with the snakes because he could suffer anaphylactic shock just from his reaction to the snake with the serum proteins. All right, so tell you a story about my daughter. She's into horses. Well, I mean, not inside the horse, but into riding horses. And she would go down for lessons down into Lodi. And as she got older, 12 or so, she would spend all summer there, come home for the weekends, and help the trainer run a camp. And met friends, daughter, a girl that rode horses with her. And so she'd either stay with her or in the camper. And I got a phone call from her one evening. She said, "Mom, I think I need rabies shots." And I said, "Why, hon?" And she said, "Well, Hannah's mom took this wild cat in, or at least a lost cat, and we found the cat she thought the cat had been killed by a car, but the kitten started acting weird, and one of the kittens bit her, and so she took it into the vet, and it was tested positive for rabies." And I said, "Well, did you get bitten?" And she said, "No, but I have blisters on the back of my heel from riding my riding boots, and the kittens licked my blister." So I called our Sacramento County, because nobody official had called me, so I called our Sacramento County, and they said, "Well, we'll have to check with San Joaquin," and because it was east of Lodi, and they called me back, and they said, "Yes, it was a confirmed case of rabies in the cat, and your daughter needs injections." Well, the mom had gotten bitten in this web space here, and they thought about giving her injections there, but they didn't. They gave her 3 injections in the anterior arm, or lateral arm. It used to be like 17 injections in your abdomen. When I was a kid, that was the way it was. And so another friend only needed 2 in her arm. So I took my daughter to Sutter one night about 10 o'clock, and they said, well, they gave her 15 injections in her heel. They had about a centimeter and a half, a mil and a half of fluid, and they put half of it in her heel with 15 different injections because you've got the bone there, so there's not much, all the way around her blister. You imagine what that felt like. They put the rest of that in her buttocks on the same side as the blister that had gotten licked. And then they gave her an injection in her arm and said, you need to come back in a week for 1 more. And then a week after that. So you need 3 injections in your arm, which was totally different from the other people. So when we came back a week later, she could hardly walk with all those injections in her heel. And when we came back a week later, I said, okay, you're done. And we're like, well, we got told we had to have a 3rd injection. And as I told the students last night, there were 2 different instructions on page 1 and page 3 of the same document about how many injections she needed. $300, which apparently is cheap. It was way over. My copay was like $40. But I read an article where a woman, they got charged at $40,000 for the injections. So, and she had insurance, but must not have been very good insurance. So, what was the difference between those 2? Passive, acquired, well, definitely acquired because it was injections. Passive or active? Active was what was given in her heel and her buttocks. So the rabies virus toxin, they wanted to eliminate before it had a chance to move to any nerves or brain. So that's why she had all the injections in that area around her heel, and then to capture it, it had already started to move up in her buttocks. And then the injections given into her arm were active, so that anywhere else they were in the body, she would develop antibodies, but they didn't want to wait for the time that it would take for that to occur, so that's why she got both. And nobody else did. She was the only one to get the active. And it may have been, although the woman got the bite, it may have been because of the openness of the wound, but she got both. I was like, yes, my kids gave me another teaching moment. All right, so getting sick is natural. You're exposed to the germ, the virus, or whatever, and you make your own antibodies. So if you come down with chicken pox, or you come down with the flu, at least that particular variation of the flu, or the measles, or whatever, you're going to have your own memory cells. Okay? So my son, when he was about a year old, got chicken pox. We were at spring training. He was a very mild case. 5 years later, when his twins were old enough, his brother and sister twins were old enough, the vaccine had come out. So he is at risk for shingles because he actually got the chicken pox. But hopefully his brother and sister won't be, since they have a vaccine and they never actually became ill with the virus. And then finally, I'm sure this is an anti-vaxxer poster, but here's the polio drops. I got the sugar cubes. So this is still active, all right? Vaccinations, if you get a flu vaccination this fall, if you already have, you're getting the attenuated or weakened virus in your body. You are going through this whole process, making memory cells and plasma cells, and so you get to keep those, all right? The reason we do it every year is because the virus changes. And so you might not be protected by the previous vaccinations that you've had. So acquired because of the method of the exposure, active because you're actually utilizing your own immune system to accomplish the production of those B cells and antibodies. Okay? And we'd be done. The hypersensitivity stuff at the end of the unit, I don't talk about, but it has to do with allergic reactions and stuff like that, and you don't get tested on it either. Okay? So if you will have a sense of satisfaction by putting next to it, you may without hurting my feelings, or you can just read it for your own edification. Okay? So I'll have exam up Sunday afternoon with instructions. Time-wise, so if I have a 70 question exam or 75 question exam, I usually look at a minute per question and then another 25 or 30 minutes in addition to that for questions that you need to think about. Okay? There won't be any fill-ins. It will all be multiple choice. There might be 5 or 6, up to 5 or 6 lab type questions. So I need this blood cell or something like that, but there's not a full-blown lab exam. Okay? You're done with it? Oh, no, one more. I gotta put the picture of the rabies virus up there. Thank you for asking. So, the girl in the story is my daughter. So, in the injections given at her heel, that would be an example of, and the purpose is to agglutinate the rabies toxin, so that gives you a clue of what we're trying to do. So that would be active or passive, and the easier part, acquired or natural form.